Hey, tonight's talk is going to be a little bit of a discussion about stress. And I have two friends here to help. I have Tilly's here, and Angel. Tilly and Angel are going to help me talk a little bit about what it means to be stressed, because first of all, they're probably stressed right now. They have each other, but they don't really like being out like this. We're all kind of stressed right now with all the bit with the virus. So let's talk about this. And when we talk about stress, we're going to talk about this in the context of the cognitive approach in psychology. And cognition, again, refers to thinking and how we think about things. So when we're talking about the cognitive approach, we're talking about how our anxieties and how stress is a lot of it up here. And a lot of the theorists that we would talk about as cognitive psychologists would say that stress is not just out in the environment, but it's how we interpret it, how we think about it, our attitudes, our beliefs about it. I think we mentioned this a little bit even in the Titanic talk, but for example, it's our perception. If, for example, you fail a test and you believe that failing that test is going to be the end of the world and you'll never get a job and no one's ever going to love you and you'll never have a place to live and all this stuff, we call that catastrophic thinking. And you've gone from one thing that may be a little bit upsetting or worrisome or sad to the worst case scenario. All right. If, for example, one of these little guys here, if maybe Angel was upset, she's going to even squeak for us. If they're upset, that they're here and they think they'll never ever go back into their home and they'll never ever have anything else to eat and they'll never ever be able to, be safe and secure, they're going to be a lot more upset, assuming they could think, than they would be if they just took things one thing at a time. All right, so when we talk about stress, the key word we're talking about here, the key term, is what we call cognitive appraisal. All right, a primary, and when we talk about that, we can break it down into what's also called primary and secondary appraisal. This also kind of dovetails, corresponds with that GAS, the General Adaptation Syndrome. All right, so in a nutshell, this is the kind of chain of events that happens when we deal with someone's stress, something that makes us stress. So let's take the example, for example, let's say me and my buddies here, let's say a predator, a huge bear walks into this room with me. All right, what that's going to do is elicit that fight or flight response. We talk sympathetic nervous system, we talk about the adrenaline, all of that. In terms of the JAS, that's alarm. All right, we're keyed up, oh my gosh. At the same time, when we talk about from the appraisal, is the first part of that is making a determination about whether or not that thing is really something to be nervous and upset about. Let's say it's a big grizzly bear and he's foaming at the mouth and he looks like he's got rabies. That would be something we probably should be scared of. On the other hand, if it's a little baby bear wearing a hat and riding a unicycle, probably doesn't matter very much. So we have to make an accurate appraisal. Okay. Sounds obvious when we talk about the bear. All right, but what about when we talk about other things? All right, what about talking about a test? You fail a test. We need to make an accurate primary appraisal. Is that something I really should be that upset about? Is it the end of the world? Does it mean that I'm failing everything I've ever done or going to do? Or is it just something that's not great at the time? So the first part of it is making that appraisal. And then the alarm is that panic, and our sympathetic response will go right along with it. The second part of the GAS is resistance. And the second part that corresponds to the second part of cognitive thinking, which is what we call, or that is called a secondary appraisal. Secondary appraisal is making a decision about what to do. What do I do about this? In regular lay people terms, we call this coping. Okay, what do I do about it? All right, we talk about coping, there's two major types. We have what's called problem-focused coping, which is things we can do to fix the problem directly. And then we have what's called emotion-focused coping, which is what we do to make ourselves feel better. Doesn't solve the problem, but it makes us feel a lot better. All right. So for example, in the case of a bear walks in here, I have to make, first of all, a I have to decide if it is scary. I make that primary appraisal that, yep, this is scary. I need to be worried about it. It's the guy with rabies. Then the second thing I need to do is I have to cope. What do I do? What can I do? This is resistance. This is secondary appraisal. Well, what could I do? Problem-focused coping would be things like throwing a chair at him, running, hiding, throwing my guinea pigs in front of me so that he gets them first or something like that. I wouldn't do that. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I wouldn't do that to you. So that's what we're talking about with a problem-focused coping. Emotion-focused coping is something I do to make myself feel better. All right, things we do like meditate, yoga, listening to music, distracting ourselves. A lot of us are doing that now with our quarantining, doing things to just make ourselves feel better. Some of these things are not always the best. People can use substances and do things that aren't always the best. But in all these cases, it's helping us to maybe relieve stress, but it's not really solving the problem. My guy Freud talked about a word called catharsis. Catharsis is an emotional release. Crying, screaming, makes us feel better sometimes, doesn't solve any problems. The last part of the GAS is called exhaustion. And this is the same thing as that learned helplessness that we talked about a while ago. All right, so learned helplessness, we give up, we resign ourselves. In an extreme form, this would be something like Stockholm Syndrome, where people that have been taken hostage may decide, hey, I can't get out of this, and I give up. Yes, we have another visitor as well. That may actually be starting the GAS in my guinea pigs, although to be honest with you, they get along fine with Blizzard because Blizzard doesn't hurt them. Anyway, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about stress. Another thing to think about here and to consider is something called locus of control. Locus of control was developed by a dude named Rotter. Rotter's idea is that some of us have what he calls an external locus of control. External locus means that we look at our lives as being, other things are involved with directing our lives. We don't have that much power. So things like God, fate, other people, the weather, anything is controlling our lives but us. People with an internal locus of control feel that they're in control. They feel powerful, they make decisions, and anything that happens to them is because of them. Now, Rotter's idea believed, and for the most part, I do think most of us understand that having some level of control is necessary to not feel too stressed out and to help us feel that we have power over our lives. But to be honest, a lot of it still comes back to that cognitive appraisal. Many cognitive psychologists come down to this, that our reasons we often get depressed and we get anxious is because we don't accurately determine and decide what's really going on in a situation. For example, let's say I fail a test. All right? If I have an internal locus of control, I'm going to blame myself. I'm going to say I didn't study, I didn't try, and in some cases I may even make it worse and think I'm not very smart or I have no ability for this. People that have an external locus of control would do the opposite. They blame everybody else. Okay, it's the teacher's fault, it's the test was too hard, or the person next to me was really cute and he distracted me, or whatever. Now, which is better? Well, I don't know that it's always one or the other. A lot of it comes down to the reality of the situation. Let's say it really was your fault. Let's say you were out partying and messing around and you didn't study, so you did badly on your test. In this case, it would be important to take control and take responsibility and have that internal locus and say, yeah, I need to study. But let's say everyone failed. Let's say the test was unfair. And now having an internal locus and blaming yourself would be pointless. It would just lead to more feelings of anxiety. In that case, recognizing that other things might be at play is important. So when we talk later on about cognitive approaches to anxiety and depression, it all comes down to this appraisal. Let's say I'm walking down the street and I hear footsteps behind me and I don't know what it is. All right, so first thing I have to do is I have to make an accurate primary appraisal. I turn around and I look, all right? If it's a guy with a gun, I'm going to be scared, and now my fight or flight is going to be activated. I'm going to be all ready to go. I'm going to need to do something. But let's say it's, you know, somebody using a cane and they look kind of old. Maybe I think I can outrun them. I'm not really too scared of that. So the first part is making an accurate appraisal. The second thing is making an accurate secondary appraisal if, in fact, that thing, that potential stressor, is really that bad. If it is a guy with a gun, all right, what do I do? Do I just sit down and meditate or listen to songs on my iPod? Or do I call 911 or do I run? So in this case, we need to solve the problem. We need to figure out a way to act, not just make ourselves feel better. People that struggle with anxiety and depression, and this is a lot of us, especially today, we don't accurately perceive our situations. We think things are more stressful than they are, and we don't look at solutions that might be right there. Because when we get really anxious and when we get really stressed, we aren't always thinking rationally. And that's the whole point of learning to deal with stress, and from the cognitive perspective. And when we talk about cognitive therapies like CBT, this is one of the ways and one of the perspectives that they're taking. So, between now and the next lecture, next talk, oh, I'm sorry guys, you guys are stressed? All right, see, I'm going to solve their problem for them and put them back in their house so they, oh, he's sneezing, she's sneezing, excuse me. Make them feel a little bit better. But use a very positive form of emotional focus. Let's calm down so we can all get through all the stress that we're all dealing with right now. Till then, peace out.